The night I lost everything was the same night fate quietly changed my life. My name is Claire Bennett, and 3 days before Christmas, I was fired from the only job keeping a roof over my head. The snow had started falling just after sunset, dusting the sidewalks of Manhattan in white, while golden lights glowed from apartment windows high above the streets. Everyone seemed to be rushing home to family, warmth, and celebration. Everyone except me. I stood outside the Wellington Grand Hotel gripping a cardboard box filled with the pieces of my life. A framed photo of my parents. A coffee mug with a chipped handle. A small notebook where I tracked every dollar I earned and every dollar I owed. The icy wind slipped through my coat as I stared at the revolving doors I had walked through almost every day for the past 2 years. 2 years of cleaning rooms, changing sheets, polishing marble floors, and smiling at guests who never learned my name. And now it was over. We're making budget cuts, my supervisor had said without meeting my eyes. I'm sorry, Claire. But I knew the truth. Budget cuts sounded better than admitting someone needed a scapegoat after a wealthy guest complained about a delayed room service order. It didn't matter that I had nothing to do with it. Someone had to go. I just happened to be the easiest person to replace. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I already knew who it was before looking. My landlord. Again. The rent was due in 5 days. I silenced the call and slipped the phone back into my coat. I wasn't ready to hear another reminder of how quickly life could unravel. The city around me sparkled with holiday cheer, while anxiety twisted inside my chest. I started walking. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stand there any longer. The sidewalks were crowded with shoppers carrying bags and laughing beneath strings of Christmas lights. Their happiness felt like a movie playing behind glass. Close enough to see but impossible to touch. After 20 minutes, my fingers had gone numb despite my gloves. I ducked beneath the awning of a small coffee shop and counted the cash in my wallet. $38. That was all. $38 between me and whatever came next. I laughed quietly, not because anything was funny, because sometimes the alternative was crying. The sky darkened further as snow drifted through the glow of street lamps. Across the street, a black SUV pulled to the curb. It was the kind of vehicle that looked expensive even from a distance. The kind driven by people whose lives never included cardboard boxes or overdue rent notices. The driver's door opened, but I barely noticed. I was too busy staring at my reflection in the coffee shop window, wondering how everything had gone wrong so fast. Then a voice behind me broke through the noise of the city. Calm, deep, unexpected. You look like someone who's trying very hard not to fall apart. I turned around, and for the first time in my life, I found myself staring into the eyes of the man who would change everything. For a second, I thought he was talking to someone else. The street was busy enough. People hurried past carrying shopping bags and paper cups, their breath rising in white clouds beneath the falling snow. But when I looked up, his eyes were fixed on mine. They were a striking shade of gray, calm and steady, like someone who had never doubted a decision in his life. I tightened my grip on the cardboard box and forced a smile. I am fine, I said. The lies sounded weak even to me. One corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Not quite a smile. More like he appreciated the effort. No, he said quietly. You are not. The strange thing was that he did not sound judgmental. He sounded certain. I glanced toward the black SUV parked at the curb. The driver remained inside, staring straight ahead. Whoever this man was, he clearly lived in a different world than I did. His dark wool coat looked expensive. His watch caught the glow of the streetlights. Everything about him suggested confidence, success, and comfort. Everything my life lacked at that moment. Look, I said, shifting the box against my hip. I appreciate the concern, but I will survive. The wind swept between the buildings, sending snow swirling around us. He studied me for a second longer. Most people say they are fine because they want the conversation to end. His voice remained calm. You said you will survive. I hated that he noticed the difference. Before I could respond, my stomach betrayed me with a low growl. Heat rushed into my cheeks. I looked away immediately. The last real meal I had eaten was almost 12 hours earlier. He heard it. Of course he heard it. New York City had suddenly become the quietest place on earth. Have you eaten dinner? He asked. That is none of your business. The answer came out sharper than I intended. To my surprise, he nodded. Fair enough. He turned toward the coffee shop behind me. For a moment, I thought the conversation was over. Then he opened the door and looked back. At least let me buy you a cup of coffee. I almost laughed. Every warning my parents ever taught me echoed inside my head. Do not trust strangers. Do not accept favors. Do not create debts you cannot repay. But another voice whispered something else. $38. Rent due in 5 days. No job. No plan. No certainty. Just exhaustion. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through the open doorway, warm and inviting against the bitter cold. Why? I asked. He seemed surprised by the question. Because everyone deserves one decent moment when they are having a terrible day. The answer caught me off guard. It sounded honest. Simple. Human. I stared at him for another second before finally stepping toward the entrance. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was fate. At the time, I had no way of knowing that walking through that coffee shop door beside a stranger would become the first step toward a life I never imagined possible. I only knew that for the first time all night, I did not feel completely alone. The warmth of the coffee shop felt almost unreal after the freezing wind outside. The windows were fogged from the heat, and the scent of roasted coffee beans wrapped around me like a blanket I did not know I needed. I set my cardboard box beside a small corner table while the stranger stepped up to the counter. He did not ask what I wanted. Instead, he looked back at me and said, "What is your favorite?" The question caught me off guard. Nobody had asked me that in a long time. Most people asked what I did, where I worked, or whether I could help them with something. Favorite felt personal somehow. Hot chocolate, I admitted. That is not coffee. I know. For the first time, a genuine smile appeared on his face. 5 minutes later, he returned carrying 2 drinks and a plate with a large chocolate chip cookie. He placed them in front of me without ceremony and sat across the table. Snow continued falling beyond the glass. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I wrapped both hands around the warm cup and felt life slowly return to my fingers. "Better?" he asked. I nodded. "Much." He looked satisfied by that answer. "I am Ethan." The name sounded familiar, but I could not place it. New York was filled with millions of people. There was no reason one name should stand out. "Claire," I replied. "Nice to meet you, Claire." There was something unusual about the way he listened. Most conversations felt like people waiting for their turn to speak. Ethan listened as though every word mattered. Somehow, before I realized it, I was telling him about losing my job. Not every detail, just enough. The hotel, the budget cuts, the uncertainty. He never interrupted. He simply listened. When I finished, he leaned back slightly and studied me. "What will you do now?" I laughed softly. "That is the million-dollar question." "And your answer?" "Find another job. Immediately." "Immediately." I took a sip of hot chocolate. People like me do not have the luxury of waiting. Something changed in his expression when I said that. Not pity. Respect. "People like you?" he asked. I shrugged. "People who count every dollar." His gaze drifted briefly toward the notebook sticking out of my cardboard box, the one where I tracked every expense. Then he looked back at me. Sometimes the people who count every dollar understand life better than the people who never have to. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed on the table. The screen lit up with a flood of notifications. Several emails. A calendar alert. Missed calls. More messages than I received in a month. Ethan glanced at the screen and silenced it without reading anything. "Important?" I asked. "Apparently. You should answer it. I would rather finish this conversation." The words surprised me more than they should have. Outside, the black SUV still waited at the curb. Inside, a stranger was ignoring what looked like an entire world demanding his attention. And somehow he was sitting here talking to me. Then the coffee shop television mounted near the counter flashed to a business news segment. A photograph appeared on the screen. The camera angle was different. The suit was different. But the face was unmistakable. My eyes widened. I slowly looked from the television back to Ethan. He followed my gaze and closed his eyes for a brief second. "Oh," I whispered. "You are that Ethan Blackwood." For the first time that evening, Ethan looked uncomfortable. Not nervous. Not embarrassed. Just resigned, like a man who had hoped to postpone an inevitable conversation. On the television behind him, a reporter stood in front of a gleaming skyscraper while his photograph filled half the screen. The headline scrolling underneath called him one of the most influential business leaders in America. I stared at the screen, then back at the man sitting across from me. Suddenly, the expensive coat, the waiting SUV, the endless notifications on his phone all made sense. "You own Blackwood Global?" I asked. Ethan took a slow sip of coffee. Among other things. I laughed once in disbelief. That is not exactly a normal thing to leave out of a conversation. You never asked. Because I did not expect to meet a billionaire in a coffee shop. His eyes softened slightly. Neither did I. I wanted to be annoyed. Maybe even angry. Instead, I found myself studying him more carefully. Nothing about his behavior matched the image I had built in my head whenever I heard stories about wealthy people. He had not bragged. He had not tried to impress me. He had bought me hot chocolate and listened while I complained about losing my job. So why are you here? I finally asked. In a coffee shop on a snowy night? Ethan glanced toward the window where snowflakes drifted beneath the streetlights. I could ask you the same question. I already told you my story. Fair point. For a moment, he seemed to weigh his answer carefully. Sometimes I drive around the city when I need to think. I blinked. That is it. That is it. Billionaires do not have private islands for that. The corner of his mouth lifted again. Private islands are surprisingly bad for thinking. Despite myself, I smiled. The tension between us eased. For the next half hour, we talked about simple things. Favorite movies. Bad coffee. The strange habits people develop living in New York City. It felt easy. Natural. Almost impossible. Somewhere along the way, I forgot I was speaking to one of the richest men in the country. He became Ethan again. Just Ethan. Then his phone buzzed once more. This time his expression changed the moment he looked at the screen. His shoulders stiffened. His jaw tightened. Whatever message had arrived clearly mattered. He stood slowly. I have to go. The disappointment that flickered through me caught me completely off guard. Right. Of course. I reached for my cardboard box and stood as well. Outside, the snowfall had grown heavier. The city glowed beneath a blanket of white. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and removed a business card. The card was simple, elegant, just his name and a phone number. He placed it on the table between us. If you need help finding work, call me. I immediately shook my head. I cannot accept charity. Something unreadable passed through his eyes. Respect, maybe. Good, he said quietly. I was hoping you would say that. Then he looked at me for a long second. Really looked at me. In that case, Claire, consider it an opportunity instead. Before I could ask what he meant, he turned and walked toward the door. And somehow I knew my life was about to change again. The card sat on my kitchen table for 3 days. 3 days of unanswered applications. 3 days of watching my savings shrink. 3 days of telling myself I was perfectly capable of fixing my own problems. Every morning, I looked at Ethan Blackwood's name printed in elegant black letters. Every morning, I promised myself I would throw it away. Every evening, it was still there. By the 4th day, reality had become difficult to ignore. The rent notice taped to my apartment door made that perfectly clear. I sat on the edge of my small couch staring at the card while snow tapped softly against the window. Pride was a wonderful thing until it started competing with electricity bills. Finally, I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered above the number for nearly a minute before I pressed call. The line rang once, twice. Then his voice appeared instantly. Claire. I froze. You knew it was me? A hint of amusement colored his tone. I was hoping it would be. My heart did something strange at that answer. I almost did not call. I know. You know everything, apparently. He laughed softly. The sound surprised me. It was warm. Human. Not the sound I expected from someone who spent his life negotiating billion-dollar deals. What can I do for you? He asked. I looked around my apartment. Peeling paint. Old furniture. A refrigerator making concerning noises from the kitchen. Telling him I needed help suddenly felt impossible. I am looking for work, I said carefully. Any work? Silence followed. Not awkward silence. Thinking silence. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? My stomach tightened. Your office? 9 o'clock. Ethan, I am not asking for special treatment. Good, he replied immediately. Because I am not offering it. The next morning, I stood outside Blackwood Global headquarters feeling completely underdressed. The building stretched into the clouds like something from another planet. Glass reflected the winter sunlight. Luxury cars lined the curb. Men and women in tailored suits moved through the revolving doors with purpose and confidence. Meanwhile, I stood there wearing my best coat and hoping nobody noticed my shoes were 3 years old. Inside, everything gleamed. Marble floors. Modern art. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. The lobby alone looked larger than my entire apartment building. A receptionist smiled when I approached. Miss Bennett. I blinked. Yes, Mr. Blackwood is expecting you. Of course he was. Moments later, an elevator carried me higher than I had ever been inside a building. My ears popped slightly as the numbers climbed. When the doors opened, a woman greeted me and led me through a quiet hallway. She stopped before a large office. You can go in. I pushed open the door. Ethan stood near the window overlooking the city. Sunlight framed his silhouette. For a moment, he looked exactly like the billionaire from television. Powerful, untouchable. Then he turned and smiled. Suddenly, he looked like the man from the coffee shop again. Good morning, Claire. I swallowed nervously. Good morning. Ethan gestured toward a chair. I think I found a job you might be interested in. Then he slid a folder across the desk. And everything changed. I stared at the folder without touching it. Somehow it felt heavier than paper should. Ethan returned to his chair and waited patiently while I opened it. The first page listed a job title. Household Operations Assistant. My eyes moved lower. Salary. Benefits. Housing allowance. Health insurance. I blinked twice because I was certain I had misread at least one of those numbers. This cannot be right, I said quietly. It is. I looked up at him. People do not get paid this much to help manage a house. Most houses are not 70,000 square feet. That was a fair point. I looked back down. The position involved helping oversee daily operations at the Blackwood estate outside the city. Staff schedules, vendor coordination, guest preparation, event support. Nothing I could not learn. Nothing that required special connections. Why me? I asked. Ethan folded his hands. Because everyone I interviewed came with an impressive resume and a sense of entitlement. And I came with neither. Exactly. I should have been offended. Instead, I laughed. Ethan smiled. Claire, when we met, you had every reason to ask for help. You did not. That matters. The room fell quiet. Nobody had ever described my stubbornness as a positive quality before. Usually it was the reason people found me difficult. I studied the paperwork again. The opportunity felt unreal, like something that happened to other people. Not me. If I accept this, I said carefully, I earn it. Ethan's expression became serious. You have my word. I believed him. The realization surprised me. We barely knew each other. Yet something about Ethan made promises feel solid, like contracts carved into stone. 30 minutes later, I left his office carrying the folder against my chest. The elevator ride down felt different from the ride up. The city outside no longer seemed quite as intimidating. By the time I reached the lobby, my phone rang. My landlord. This time I answered. For the first time in weeks, I had good news to share. 2 days later, a black SUV arrived outside my apartment building. Neighbors peeked through curtains. An elderly woman across the hall nearly dropped her groceries. I could not blame them. Vehicles like that did not usually visit our neighborhood. The driver loaded my suitcases while I stood on the sidewalk staring at the snow-covered city. Everything was happening so fast. A week ago, I had been unemployed and terrified. Now I was heading toward a future I could not quite imagine. The drive lasted a little over an hour. Gradually, the crowded city streets gave way to quiet roads lined with trees dusted in white. Then the gates appeared, tall wrought iron framed by stone pillars. Beyond them stretched a long, winding driveway disappearing into the distance. My breath caught. The estate was beautiful. Not flashy, not loud, just impossibly elegant. The mansion stood at the end of the drive surrounded by winter gardens and rolling hills. It looked less like a home and more like something from an old movie. As the SUV came to a stop, I stepped out and stared upward. Somewhere inside that enormous house was my new life. Then the front door opened. A woman in a dark uniform hurried down the steps toward me. Her smile seemed warm enough, but the first thing she said made my stomach tighten. Miss Bennett, welcome to Blackwood Estate. There is only one rule you absolutely cannot break. Never go to the third floor. The smile on my face froze for a fraction of a second. The third floor? I repeated. The woman nodded immediately. Yes, it is private. Her tone remained polite, but something about the way she said it made further questions feel unwelcome. Understood, I replied. She seemed relieved. Good. My name is Margaret. I oversee the household staff. She led me through the front doors and into the mansion. Warm air greeted us instantly. The scent of fresh pine drifted through the halls from enormous Christmas trees decorated with white lights and silver ornaments. Everything felt elegant without feeling cold. The floors gleamed. The chandeliers sparkled overhead. Yet somehow the house still felt lived in. like a home rather than a museum. Margaret gave me a tour of the main areas. The dining room alone could have hosted 50 people. The library contained more books than my old neighborhood bookstore. Every room seemed larger than the apartment I had just left behind. By the time we reached my living quarters, I was struggling to process everything. "This is for me?" I asked. Margaret smiled. Of course. The room was beautiful. A comfortable bed, a fireplace, large windows overlooking snow-covered gardens. For several seconds, I simply stood there staring. "Most employees stay in the staff wing," Margaret explained. "Mr. Blackwood wanted you close to the main offices since you will be helping coordinate operations." Hearing Ethan's name made something flutter unexpectedly inside my chest. I quickly ignored it. This was a job, nothing more. The following days passed in a blur. I learned schedules, met employees, organized deliveries, reviewed event calendars. There was always something happening at Blackwood Estate. Yet despite the size of the property, one thing stood out. Ethan was rarely home. Some days I only caught brief glimpses of him leaving for meetings before sunrise or returning long after dark. The entire estate seemed to operate around his schedule. Then came Thursday afternoon. I was reviewing vendor invoices in a small office when I heard something unusual. Laughter. Not adult laughter. A child's laughter. The sound was brief but unmistakable. Curious, I stepped into the hallway. The laughter came again from somewhere above me. My eyes drifted upward toward the staircase leading to the third floor. The forbidden floor. The hallway fell silent again. I told myself to return to work. Instead, I stood there listening. A moment later, I noticed something else. A small green toy dinosaur sitting on the edge of a stair. My stomach tightened. Children did not simply appear inside billionaire mansions. Especially children nobody mentioned. That evening, I found Margaret in the kitchen. "Can I ask you something?" Her expression became cautious immediately. "Possibly. Is there a child living here?" The wooden spoon in her hand stopped moving. For a second, the room became completely still. Then she sighed softly. "You hear things quickly. So there is." Margaret looked toward the doorway to make certain we were alone. When she spoke again, her voice dropped to a whisper. "There is a young boy. Ethan's son." She nodded. My breath caught. Nobody on television had ever mentioned a son. No article. No interview. Nothing. "Why does nobody talk about him?" I asked quietly. Margaret looked genuinely sad. "Because after what happened 2 years ago, he stopped talking to the world first." For the rest of that evening, I could not stop thinking about the boy. After what happened 2 years ago, the words echoed in my mind long after Margaret left the kitchen. There had been sadness in her eyes when she said them. Not fear. Not discomfort. Sadness. The kind that lingers. The kind that changes a family forever. I tried focusing on work, vendor schedules, inventory reports, guest lists. None of it helped. Every time I glanced toward a staircase or heard footsteps overhead, I found myself wondering about the child nobody discussed. The next afternoon, a winter storm rolled across the estate. Snow drifted against the windows while gray clouds swallowed the sky. Most of the staff stayed busy preparing for an upcoming holiday gathering. I was carrying a stack of folders through the east wing when I noticed something unusual. One of the library doors stood slightly open. As I passed, movement caught my eye. I paused. A small figure sat near the fireplace inside the room. My heartbeat quickened. The boy looked about 8 years old. Dark hair, pale skin, a navy sweater slightly too large for his frame. He sat cross-legged on a rug with a sketchbook resting on his knees. For several seconds, I simply stood there. Then he looked up. Bright green eyes met mine. The same eyes I had seen in Ethan. The resemblance was impossible to miss. Neither of us moved. The silence stretched between us. Finally, I offered a small wave. "Hi." He stared at me. No smile. No response. Then his gaze dropped back to the sketchbook. I should have left. Instead, curiosity won. Slowly, I stepped into the room. "I am Claire." Nothing. I moved closer to a nearby chair and sat down. The fireplace crackled softly. Snow tapped against the windows. The boy continued drawing without acknowledging me. I glanced toward the page. Winter trees. Snow-covered hills. Tiny details sketched with remarkable care. "That is really good," I said honestly. His pencil paused for a fraction of a second, then continued moving. I smiled to myself. Progress. Maybe. For the next 10 minutes, neither of us spoke. Or rather, I did not speak and he could not. We simply existed in the same room. Strangely, it felt peaceful. Then the library door opened. I looked up. Ethan stood in the doorway. His expression shifted instantly when he saw us. Surprise. Concern. Something deeper I could not identify. His eyes moved from me to his son, then back again. The room felt suddenly smaller. I did not realize anyone was in here, I said quietly, standing from the chair. Ethan remained motionless for a second. Then his gaze settled on the sketchbook in his son's lap. The boy was still drawing. Calm, comfortable, present. Something flickered across Ethan's face. Hope. Pure hope. It appeared so briefly I almost missed it. He stayed. Ethan asked softly. I nodded. Yes. Silence filled the room again. Then Ethan looked at me as though seeing me for the first time all over again. And that was when I realized meeting his son might matter far more than either of us understood. After that afternoon, something changed inside the estate. Not dramatically, not all at once, just enough for me to notice. Over the next week, I saw Ethan's son several more times. His name was Oliver. I learned that from Margaret. Nobody called him Ollie. Nobody shortened it. Everyone spoke his name carefully, like something fragile. Most days I found him in the library with his sketchbook. Sometimes he sat beside the enormous windows watching snow drift across the gardens. Sometimes he built entire worlds from blocks and never looked up. He still never spoke. Not to me. Not to anyone. Yet every time I entered the room, he stayed. That alone seemed important. One afternoon, I brought a puzzle into the library and placed it on a nearby table. I did not ask him to help. I simply started working on it myself. 10 minutes later, a small hand quietly slid a piece into place. I glanced over. Oliver immediately looked away. I pretended not to notice. Another 5 minutes passed. Another piece appeared. Then another. By the time we finished, neither of us had spoken a word. Yet somehow it felt like a conversation. Later that evening, I was organizing schedules in the main office when Ethan appeared in the doorway. He looked tired. Not physically tired. Something deeper. The kind of exhaustion that sleep could not fix. His tie was loosened. His jacket hung over one shoulder. The city lights glowed beyond the windows behind him. Margaret tells me Oliver spent 3 hours with you today, he said. I set down my pen, mostly with a puzzle. A faint smile touched his face. That is still more interaction than most people get. The room grew quiet. Ethan stepped closer to the desk and glanced at the paperwork scattered across it. How are you adjusting? Honestly. Always. I smiled. I still feel like I accidentally wandered into someone else's life. He laughed softly. You are doing a better job running this place than half the people I interviewed. That sounds like an insult directed at your hiring process. It probably is. For a moment, the conversation felt easy, comfortable. Then a sharp voice echoed from the hallway outside. Ethan, there you are. Both of us turned toward the door. A woman entered without knocking. She was beautiful in the polished way magazine covers are beautiful. Perfect hair, perfect posture, perfect confidence. Everything about her suggested old money and elite social circles. Her eyes landed on me immediately. I felt evaluated in less than 2 seconds. I did not realize you were busy, she said, though her tone suggested she did not particularly care. Ethan's expression changed instantly. The warmth disappeared. The distance returned. Claire, this is Sophia Harrington, he said. Sophia, this is Claire Bennett. Sophia offered a smile that never reached her eyes. The new employee. Something about the way she said employee made it sound like a warning rather than a description. Then she stepped closer to Ethan and lightly touched his arm. Your mother is waiting for us. We need to finalize the engagement announcement. The room went completely silent. And for reasons I could not explain, my heart sank. The engagement announcement haunted me for days. Not because it affected my job. Not because it changed anything important. At least that was what I kept telling myself. Yet every time I saw Ethan afterward, I remembered the way Sophia had stood beside him. The way she belonged in his world so effortlessly. Wealth recognized wealth. Power recognized power. Meanwhile, I still felt grateful every time I bought groceries without checking my bank account first. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Christmas arrived at Blackwood Estate in a blur of preparation. Staff moved through the halls carrying decorations, floral arrangements, and catering schedules. Guests were expected for an annual holiday gathering hosted by the Blackwood family. My responsibilities doubled overnight. Every hour seemed scheduled. Every detail mattered. 2 days before the event, I was reviewing seating arrangements in the library when Oliver appeared beside me. He placed a folded piece of paper on the desk. Then he quietly stepped back. I stared at the paper. My pulse quickened. Slowly, I opened it. Inside was a drawing. A winter landscape covered in snow. A large house surrounded by trees. Near the front entrance stood two figures. One was clearly Oliver. The other looked suspiciously like me. For a moment I could not speak. "Did you draw this for me?" Oliver lowered his eyes but gave the smallest nod. It was the first gift he had ever given anyone, according to Margaret. My throat tightened unexpectedly. "Thank you," I whispered. His expression remained serious, but I thought I saw the hint of a smile before he turned and left the room. That evening I found Ethan standing alone near the grand staircase. The house had finally gone quiet. Most of the staff had retired for the night. Soft Christmas lights reflected against polished wood and marble. I handed him the drawing. "Oliver gave me this today." Ethan studied the page for several seconds. His expression softened immediately. He has not shared his artwork with anyone outside the family in over a year. I looked down at the drawing again. "It is beautiful. So is what it means." His voice was quiet. I glanced up. Ethan was looking at me, not the drawing. The moment stretched longer than it should have. Then footsteps echoed from the hallway. The spell broke instantly. The next morning the estate transformed into something out of a magazine. Luxury vehicles filled the driveway. Elegant guests arrived wearing designer coats and polished smiles. Cameras flashed outside the gates. Reporters gathered along the road, hoping for photographs. Inside, conversations revolved around investments, acquisitions, and social influence. It felt like an entirely different universe. I spent most of the evening ensuring everything ran smoothly. Then, while carrying updated guest information toward the ballroom, I overheard two women talking nearby. "That must be her." "The employee?" "Yes, the one Ethan keeps around." I froze. Their voices lowered, but not enough. "Strange choice. Very strange. Sophia cannot be happy about it." Heat rushed into my face. I kept walking without looking back. Yet the whispers followed me throughout the evening. Curious glances, subtle smiles, quiet speculation. By midnight, I understood something important. In this world, people noticed everything. And for the first time, they were beginning to notice me. The whispers did not stop after the holiday party. If anything, they multiplied. By the first week of January, I could feel them following me through the estate like invisible shadows. Staff members remained professional, but guests were different. Some smiled too politely. Others asked questions that sounded harmless until you thought about them later. How long had I worked for Ethan? Did I enjoy spending so much time around the family? Was I planning to stay permanently? Every conversation seemed to carry a second meaning beneath the words. I hated it. One snowy afternoon, I escaped to the library hoping for a few quiet minutes. Oliver sat near the fireplace with a stack of books beside him. As usual, he looked up when I entered. As usual, he stayed. I settled into a nearby chair and opened a report I had been reviewing. The silence felt comfortable. Safe. Then Oliver surprised me. He stood, walked across the room, and handed me a folded piece of paper. Inside was another drawing. This one showed three people standing beneath a large tree covered in lights. Ethan, Oliver, me. My chest tightened instantly. "It is beautiful," I whispered. Oliver watched my face carefully. For a brief moment, something almost like happiness appeared in his eyes. Then the library door opened. Ethan stepped inside and immediately noticed the drawing in my hands. His gaze moved from the page to his son. The room grew very still. Oliver hesitated, then quietly returned to his chair. Ethan crossed the room slowly. "Another masterpiece?" he asked. I handed him the paper. He studied it for several seconds. When he finally looked up, there was emotion in his eyes he did not bother hiding. He has not drawn himself with other people in a long time. I swallowed hard. I did not know. Ethan nodded once. Neither did I. The silence between us felt different now. Warmer. More dangerous. Because neither of us could pretend anymore that something important was happening. Not just with Oliver. With us. That evening I found myself unable to sleep. Snow drifted beyond my bedroom windows while moonlight painted silver patterns across the floor. Around midnight, I decided to make tea. The mansion was quiet as I walked downstairs. Halfway to the kitchen, I noticed lights spilling from beneath a door near the study. Curious, I slowed my steps. Voices drifted through the partially open doorway. Ethan's voice. and another woman's. Victoria Blackwood. His mother. I should have walked away. Instead, I froze. The announcement cannot be delayed forever, Victoria said sharply. Sophia is the right choice. Ethan sounded tired. For whom? For this family. For your future. For Oliver. Silence followed. Then Victoria spoke again. People are already talking. My stomach dropped. About what? Ethan asked. About the employee. The word landed like ice water. Claire has done nothing wrong. That is not how society works, Ethan. Another pause. Longer this time. Then Victoria's voice softened. You cannot seriously be considering this. I backed away before I heard his answer. But the look on Ethan's face the next morning told me everything. Because for the first time since I met him, he looked like a man standing between his heart and the entire world. For 3 days, I avoided Ethan. Not intentionally at first. There was simply always work to do. Reports to organize. Meetings to coordinate. Staff schedules to update. Yet deep down, I knew the truth. Hearing Victoria's words had changed something. The distance between Ethan and me was no longer imaginary. It had a name. Expectations. Family. Reputation. A future already planned by people far more powerful than me. The realization settled heavily in my chest. On the 4th morning, I made a decision. Before I could talk myself out of it, I sat at my desk and began typing a resignation letter. The words blurred together. Gratitude. Opportunity. Personal reasons. Every sentence felt like a lie hiding a larger truth. I was leaving because staying had become impossible. Not because anyone asked me to. Because every day made it harder to remember my place in his world. By afternoon, the letter sat folded inside an envelope. My hands trembled as I carried it toward Ethan's office. The mansion seemed unusually quiet. Outside, winter sunlight reflected off fresh snow, turning the grounds into a sea of white. I stopped outside his door and stared at the envelope for a long moment. Then I slipped it beneath a stack of documents on his desk and left before courage failed me. That evening I packed my belongings. The room that had once felt like a dream now felt temporary again. A suitcase stood open on the bed. Books, clothes, small keepsakes, Oliver's drawings. My eyes lingered on those the longest. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. I opened the door. Oliver stood in the hallway. He looked from me to the suitcase, then back again. Something in his expression immediately shattered my heart. He understood. Somehow he understood. Slowly, he stepped forward and handed me a folded page. Another drawing. This one showed 3 people standing together beneath a bright spring sky. The figures were holding hands. My vision blurred. Thank you, I whispered. Oliver remained still. Then something happened that neither of us expected. His lips parted slightly. His voice emerged rough from disuse. Barely above a whisper. Stay. The single word froze time. I stared at him. Oliver looked shocked himself, as though he could not believe what had happened. My eyes filled instantly. Before I could respond, hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway. Ethan appeared around the corner. His gaze moved from Oliver to me. Then he heard it. He understood immediately. Hope flooded his face. Oliver, he whispered. His son looked toward him. Silence filled the corridor. Yet everything had changed. Then Ethan noticed the suitcase behind me. His expression shifted. Confusion. Concern. Realization. Claire, he said quietly. What is this? I could not answer. Not with Oliver standing there. Not with my heart breaking inside my chest. Ethan stepped forward. His eyes searched mine. Then he spoke the words I never expected to hear. Please tell me you are not leaving. And for the first time since I met him, the most powerful man I had ever known sounded afraid. For a moment, nobody moved. Oliver stood between us, clutching the edge of his sweater. Ethan waited for an answer, and I stood there holding a suitcase that suddenly felt much heavier than it had 5 minutes earlier. The silence stretched until I could barely breathe. I thought it was the right thing to do. I finally whispered. Ethan's eyes never left mine. For who? I looked away. For everyone. A sad smile touched his face. Everyone except us. The truth of those words hit harder than I expected. I thought about the conversations I had overheard. The whispers at the party. The engagement announcement. The impossible gap between our worlds. Your family wants something different for you, I said quietly. My family has wanted many things for me. His voice remained calm. Steady. Most of them were never my choice. Oliver looked from Ethan to me, then back again. His small hand slipped into his father's. Ethan squeezed it gently. Do you know what happened after you arrived here? He asked. I shook my head. This house became brighter. I opened my mouth to protest, but he continued. The staff laughs more. Oliver spends time downstairs again. And for the first time in years, I started looking forward to coming home. Emotion tightened his voice on the final sentence. The billionaire from magazine covers disappeared completely. Only Ethan remained. The man from the coffee shop. The man who bought hot chocolate for a stranger on the worst night of her life. I felt tears gathering despite my efforts to stop them. What about Sophia? The question escaped before I could stop it. Ethan actually laughed. A genuine laugh. Sophia ended our engagement this morning. My eyes widened. What? She informed me that marrying someone who clearly cared about another woman would be a terrible investment. Despite everything, I laughed too. The sound echoed softly through the hallway. Relief flooded Ethan's face. Then something remarkable happened. Oliver tugged gently on his father's sleeve. Ethan looked down. His son hesitated for several seconds before speaking. The words came slowly, carefully. Do not go. Both of us froze. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. I covered my mouth with trembling fingers. Oliver had spoken again. 2 simple words. Yet they carried more meaning than entire conversations. The next few months passed like spring arriving after a long winter. The snow melted. The gardens bloomed. Oliver spoke more often. First a few words. Then complete sentences. Laughter returned to the estate. Real laughter. The kind that fills empty spaces and makes a house feel alive. Some people still whispered. Some always would. But their voices grew quieter while our lives grew louder. On a warm Saturday afternoon in early June, Ethan led me to the garden where Oliver had planted a row of white roses. There were no reporters, no executives, no society guests, only family, only people who mattered. Ethan reached into his pocket and held out a small velvet box. My heart stopped. The world spent a long time telling me what my life should look like, he said softly. Then you walked into a coffee shop and changed everything. Tears blurred my vision. Claire Bennett, will you marry me? Somewhere nearby, Oliver grinned so hard it looked like his face might break. I laughed through my tears and nodded. Yes. Ethan slipped the ring onto my finger. The sunlight caught the diamond. Birds sang from the gardens. And for the first time in my life, I understood something simple and beautiful. Love was never about finding someone who belonged in your world. It was about finding someone who made the world feel like home.